It was nearly midnight. The front door opened and in walked a man who smelled of expensive cigars and borrowed confidence. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask about her day. He went straight to the bourbon cabinet, poured himself a glass, turned around, and looked at his wife the way you look at something mildly disappointing. Then he said it. His friend had asked him why he was still with someone so safe, so predictable, so ordinary. He expected tears. He expected an argument, maybe even a plate thrown across the kitchen. Instead, Riley Adams kept folding her dish towel. She smoothed every crease. She placed it on the counter, and she asked him just one question. "And what did you tell them about me?" What followed would unravel everything he thought he knew about power, about success, and about the woman he had so catastrophically underestimated. Because while Gavin was performing wealth for his ambitious friends, Riley had been quietly, methodically building an empire worth $34 million. Never mistake a quiet woman for a powerless one. The ones who say the least often have the most to show. If that hit home for you, like this video, drop a comment, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe. More stories like this are waiting for you. This content was manually researched, developed, and edited by our team with the sole purpose of delivering meaning, insight, and a story worth remembering.
Riley's marriage didn't die in a shouting match. It ended with the clink of ice in his glass as he called her plane. Just hours after we'd landed a $34 million contract he knew nothing about. She told me she didn't plead or cry. She just gave him that terrifying silence of hers that makes men talk themselves into a grave. She's learned that real endings never announce themselves. There wasn't some big dramatic scene. It was just the quiet of their kitchen, a dish towel in her hands, and the oblivious cruelty of a man who was so sure he had already won. He got home near midnight, she said, smelling like expensive cigars and the kind of cheap confidence his friends traffic in. Those guys treat every dinner like a hostile negotiation. She was at the island folding laundry, a small, calming ritual in the chaos he created. He walked right past her, didn't say hello, and went straight for the bourbon. Of course he did. I could picture it perfectly. Him pouring a drink, the sound echoing in the kitchen. He leaned back and gave her a look she described as detached pity, like a doctor about to deliver bad news. Then he started quoting some garbage from his hero, Bryce Danner. "I know Bryce. He's a real estate shark who doesn't have friends, only a list of assets and liabilities. This Bryce guy apparently asked Gavin why someone on his trajectory was with a woman too ordinary for the rooms he needed to be in. I've always known Gavin was a fool, but this was a new low. An ordinary woman might have screamed. An ordinary woman might have thrown something. But Riley isn't ordinary. She just kept folding that linen towel without so much as a flinch. She looked him dead in the eye and asked a single quiet question. And what was your answer?" His shrug told her everything she needed to know about his loyalty. Nothing. He actually said he told them she was dependable, a good foundation. Then he had the nerve to say they had a point, that she wasn't built to make heads turn. I wanted to scream for her. He said it all with this patronizing tone, she told me, like he was coaching her. He was waiting for her to break. He had no idea he was talking to a titan. The world Gavin never bothered to look at was the one where Riley was building an empire. While he was out playing pretend, we were building Hawthorne grid solutions from the ground up. He'd call it her cute little business at parties. That same day, we had finalized a $34 million software contract with Peregrine North. Some cute business. She had secured our company's future with a deal worth millions. And there he was, in the home she paid for, drinking liquor she bought, telling her she wasn't good enough. She said the sheer nerve of it was almost funny, but giving him an emotional reaction would be playing his game. She knew better. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. So instead of fighting, she refused to play her part. She told me her greatest weapon was her refusal to engage in his pathetic drama. All she said was, "I see." Her voice was perfectly flat. He was completely thrown. He repeated her words back to her, totally baffled that she wasn't falling apart at his feet. She just said, "Yes." She knew he was waiting for the meltdown. When it didn't come, he just stood there, awkward and deflated. He had no script for a woman who wouldn't read her lines. He mumbled something about an early morning and went to their room. She stayed in the kitchen for a long time, listening to him fall asleep, completely oblivious. He was sleeping like a man who has no clue he's about to fall through the floor. She didn't go to bed. She opened her laptop, the blue light cutting through the dark room. She pulled up her encrypted email and typed in the name Vera Sloan, the shark of a lawyer who helped us set up Hawthorne Grid. She didn't write some long, heartbroken story. Riley moved with the same brutal efficiency that had made our company a success. Her email was one line. Vera, I need a complete forensic accounting. Start drafting the firewall. With one click, the message was sent. A silent torpedo aimed right at the life he thought he controlled. She closed the laptop, and for the first time, she told me she felt completely awake. I remember when she met him 7 years ago at some awful tech conference in Denver. He was holding court by the coffee machine, all magnetic energy and empty words. I'll admit, he had a certain charm back then, the kind you see in men who are high on their own potential. His tiny company was all corporate jargon and no actual substance. He was always on the verge of his next big break, a breakthrough that was always conveniently just around the corner. He sold an image, not a product. Riley was always different. She was never about the slick facade. She was about the foundation, the wiring, the things that actually worked. A year before that, we'd both been laid off. Instead of updating our resumes, we pooled our severance money and started Hawthorne Grid Solutions from her spare bedroom. We don't build things that get flashy headlines. We build things that last. People don't think about what we do, and that's the whole point. At Hawthorne Grid, Riley and I built the invisible architecture of modern life. The systems that run compliance audits while a city sleeps, the protocols that keep the lights on. We designed the digital safety nets that stop a penthouse apartment from flooding just because a pipe bursts 30 floors below. We were the ones writing the code that ensures a hospital's backup power never, ever fails. We built the frameworks that kept national hotel chains from getting shut down by a surprise health inspection. And Gavin? He just wanted to design the cool, minimalist logos for those same hotel chains. While he was sketching fonts, Riley was in the trenches, making sure those billion-dollar structures didn't collapse into a pile of lawsuits and rubble at 3 a.m. I remember, in the beginning, she told me she thought their differences were a kind of beautiful symmetry, a perfect modern balance, she called it. I thought it sounded exhausting. He had this whole narrative spun up where he was the big-picture visionary, the artist painting the sky. And Riley? She was the practical one, the engineer pouring the concrete. I'd watch her listen, completely mesmerized while he'd go on for hours about his world-changing ideas. For her, his wild optimism was like a vacation from her world of risk analysis. After her days buried in failure probability charts and safety regulations, I guess I get it. She figured a guy with dreams that big just needed a grounded woman to keep him anchored. But the warning signs were there from the start, blinking like a cheap router light. And she chose to ignore every single one. I can't count the nights she'd call me after one of his monologues about a pitch to some tiny gym startup. He would reenact every smile, every handshake, every line he thought was some off-the-cuff stroke of genius. He'd break down his own performance like a sports commentator analyzing a game-winning play. But the second she tried to share a win of her own, like the insane week she and Noel spent rebuilding the fire suppression code for a 50-story tower in Atlanta, his eyes would just glaze over. He'd give her this patronizing little smile, pat her hand, and say something like, "Wow, that sounds really complicated, babe." Then, like clockwork, he'd pivot right back to his drama with a freelance designer or some other client who just wasn't smart enough to get it. He never asked a follow-up question. Not one. Not about the algorithm, not about the size of the contract, not about what it felt like to know her work was keeping thousands of people safe. Her world was invisible to him because it didn't involve red carpets or Instagram photo ops. Instead of seeing his complete and utter disinterest as a massive red flag, she explained it away. She told me this was what a real partnership looked like, that rom-coms had sold us a lie about partners needing to be obsessed with every detail of our lives. She saw herself as the pragmatic one. They were just two professionals in different fields, she'd say. I think she truly made herself believe they just had different love languages. Hers was managing their entire life so he could focus on his art. And his, she assumed, was just showing up at the end of the day. They got married after about 2 years. It was a quick chic thing downtown with maybe 50 people. We all knew kids were off the table. It was this unspoken agreement that suited their ambitious city lives. The week they got back from their honeymoon, Gavin moved his few boxes from his messy apartment into her condo. And I mean her condo. The gorgeous, sun-drenched place in the best part of Charlotte she'd bought with her own money years before she even met him. That move-in day wasn't a celebration. Looking back, it was the day the entire toxic dynamic of their marriage was set in stone. The moment they were officially married, Riley became the invisible, tireless support system for their entire life together. Gavin lived in a world of big ideas and future plans, which meant he was fundamentally incapable of handling the present. He had no idea when their property taxes were due. He couldn't reset the Wi-Fi router to save his life. He'd let his car registration expire, and they'd only find out when a massive fine showed up in the mail. So Riley just stepped in. She put all their bills on auto pay from her account. She scheduled the HVAC maintenance. She even remembered his own mother's birthday and sent flowers, signing his name so he'd look like a good son. She was constantly catching all the pieces of his life he was too important to hold on to. And she did it all quietly, efficiently, running their home with the same ruthless competence she used to run our company. She engineered their domestic world to be flawless. His expensive suits were always dry cleaned. The fridge was always stocked with that ridiculously overpriced, sparkling water he liked. She built him a perfect, frictionless bubble so he could pour all his energy into his struggling agency, West Hollow Creative. She honestly thought she was just being a supportive partner, making a smart investment in their shared future. It took her years to see that by managing every mundane detail of his life, she was teaching him that her time, her energy, and her peace of mind were completely expendable. She built the perfect stage for his life, and in doing so, she agreed to live backstage in the dark. A man's ego doesn't just break, it corrodes. And watching Gavin's career was like watching metal rust in slow motion. For all his big talk, West Hollow Creative never went anywhere. He must have rebranded that agency 3 times. First, they were brand storytellers. Then they were disruptive social media pioneers. His last pivot was to some nonsense called a boutique digital synergy firm. He burned through all of his initial capital, twice. I remember her calling me one afternoon, her voice flat after a certified letter from the IRS arrived. It was a penalty for thousands of dollars because he hadn't kept proper payroll records or paid his quarterly taxes. And his reaction, pure rage. Of course, it was never his fault. It was the market. It was his bookkeepers. It was the clients who lacked vision. The blame was a hot potato he could never hold. And Riley absorbed every single financial hit so seamlessly he never even felt the impact. Her salary was the silent, steady force patching all the holes in his sinking ship. Their premium health insurance? All her. When his income couldn't cover his half of the mortgage, which was often, she just paid it. When their air conditioning died in the middle of July, she had it replaced before he even had a chance to complain about the heat. She also paid the 5-figure legal bill to get him out of a nightmare contract he'd signed. And that's not even counting the small stuff. The constant cash flow she provided so he could keep up the appearance of a successful entrepreneur. The high-speed internet he needed for client calls was on her tab. The fancy coffee he served in his office? Her too. She never brought it up. His entire fantasy was being bankrolled by the one person whose success he refused to see. While he was failing upwards, Hawthorne Grid was quietly taking over. We hired our 10th employee, then our 20th. We had over 30 people in contracts in 6 different states with major hospital networks and developers. Riley never gloated. She just worked. Her days were a whirlwind of debugging code and flying to client sites, and she'd always race home to be a patient audience for his latest professional grievance. Their social life was a masterclass in gaslighting, where every detail about her life was contorted to fit his narrative. He was obsessed with networking, so he dragged them to an endless string of parties. And at every single one, I'd watch him do it. I'd watch him shrink my brilliant, powerful friend and her incredible career into a bite-sized, non-threatening hobby. We'd be standing there, and someone would ask what she did, and he'd just smile and say, "Oh, Riley's in tech." Riley used to tell me how, at every industry party, Gavin had his little script. Someone would ask what she did, and he'd jump in with that smarmy smile, hand on her back, saying, "Riley handles our back-end compliance tech." Or he'd laugh, calling her the queen of complicated checklists for landlords. He made her sound like a paper pusher in a cubicle, and his contacts would just nod politely, mentally filing her away as the supportive wife with a boring, stable job. A nice little side income, but nothing serious. Nothing like him, of course. They never knew they were talking to the architect of a system protecting billions in assets. She told me she'd feel this flash of fury, this urge to just lay out the facts for them right there. She wanted to explain that her checklists were actually bleeding-edge algorithms that stopped buildings from falling down. But then she'd see it in Gavin's eyes, this pathetic need to be the biggest deal in the room. Correcting him wouldn't just be about the truth. It would have been a public execution of his ego. Showing them how big her success was would only highlight how small his were. So she'd just sip her wine, force a smile, and let him pivot back to whatever vaporware he was pitching. She chose peace over her own damn truth. She just didn't have the fight in her to turn every cocktail party into a referendum on her own worth. Their needs were just fundamentally different. Gavin needed applause to exist. Without an audience, he'd just deflate. I saw it happen in real time. Riley was perfectly happy building something real, something that worked, and didn't need a single ounce of praise for it. 4 years into that marriage, the canyon between their careers was vast. Hawthorne Grid was dominating the market, landing huge clients, and our revenue was exploding. But when Gavin would bother to ask about her day, he'd still call our entire company your little inspection software business. It was always a preface to his own drama monologue. That one word, little, was his favorite weapon. It was a tiny poison needle he used to keep her small, to make sure she never cast a shadow on his own sad, failing ambitions. And by that 4th year, I could see the weight of her silence was crushing her. She told me about one night she was looking at a report showing 300% growth year over year. At the same time, she could hear Gavin in the other room, screaming into his phone about another deal he'd lost. She just stared at those numbers. Our numbers. Then it registered. She'd just moved $2,000 into their joint account so his car payment wouldn't get declined. The next morning, she said, the fog just lifted. Her silence wasn't grace. It was a disease, and it was killing her. For years, she had intentionally shrunk herself. She had sanded down her own edges, muted her own brilliance, all so this deeply average man wouldn't feel threatened. She was dimming her own light to fuel his, and it was guttering her out. After the night he called her ordinary, she said the air in their home finally felt breathable. The exhausting charade she'd maintained for 4 years was over. She was at the office before I was, up at 5 with a black coffee ready for war. She needed a headquarters, not a home. Sitting at her desk, she called me. No hello, no small talk. She just repeated what he'd said to her, word for word. Her voice was flat, hollowed out. She told me about Bryce Danner's verdict and how Gavin just co-signed it, that she was ordinary, safe, not someone who commanded respect. I'm usually the first with a comeback, but I was just silent. When I finally spoke, my voice was ice. I felt like a strategist prepping the battlefield. Lock him out of everything, I told her. Right now, Riley. Secure it all. After she hung up with me, she called Vera Sloan, our lawyer. Vera had already read the encrypted email Riley sent at 3 a.m. For the next 2 hours, they mapped out her entire position, financially and legally. Vera was a shark, confirming her defenses were ironclad. The condo is yours alone, purchased 3 years pre-marriage, Vera said, all business. I could hear her typing furiously. Crucially, she went on, Hawthorne Grid's IP and foundational tech were registered years before you two met. All investments and reinvested profits were routed through corporate accounts. There's a total firewall between your business and personal finances. He can't touch the company, Riley. She didn't have a big screaming match with him. She just started quietly turning all the keys and all the locks she'd left open for him out of trust. She changed the passwords on their shared banking apps, cutting off his view into her earnings. She logged her accounts out of the shared tablet. She stopped bringing home physical copies of contracts, locking everything in the office safe instead. Her first real power move was just deleting her work life from their shared calendar. Such a small thing, but it meant if he wanted to know where she was, he'd have to actually ask. Meanwhile, at work, we were in the final brutal push for the $34 million Peregrine deal. The nice part was over. This was just a grim battle over liability clauses. We were fighting about indemnification, proving our cybersecurity was a fortress, and mapping out a killer deployment schedule. The contract meant integrating our platform across over 1,000 properties in a tight 18-month timeline. Every waking moment for her was about risk models and facing down Peregrine's lawyers. The pressure was insane, and she was born for it. But when she got home, the shift was stark. It wasn't about what she did. It was about everything she stopped doing. She quit performing all the invisible labor that kept his life afloat. She saw the state tax form on his desk, due in 2 days, and just walked past it. No more gentle reminders. She saw the amateurish pitch deck he had open before a huge meeting. She didn't fix it for him. When he was having a meltdown about his favorite navy tie, she just called from the kitchen that she hadn't seen it, leaving him to drown in his own mess. That ingrained habit of smoothing his path was just gone. She stopped clearing the way. Gavin felt it immediately. He couldn't name it, but he knew the safety net had been removed. It was like feeling a sudden cold draft in a house he thought was sealed. He had no clue which window she had opened, so he tried to fix it with this cringy, over-the-top kindness campaign. Pouring her wine the second she walked in, asking these vapid questions about her day, trying to fill the huge, echoing silence between them. One Thursday, over the takeout he'd anxiously ordered, he tried again. "So," he started, using his fake networking voice, "how's things at the compliance shop? Anything big coming up?" For the first time, she refused to play small for him. She didn't make a joke about paperwork. She looked him dead in the eye, put her fork down, and just gave him the raw truth. "We are finalizing a landmark deployment partnership." I remember her telling me exactly what she said, her voice like steel. "I spent 9 hours today negotiating a catastrophic failure clause. Our engineers are mapping a data migration for over 1,000 commercial properties. The penalties for failure are astronomical, but I capped our liability and secured full IP rights." She said, "The final terms lock next week." Then she just leaned back and watched the information crash over him. He heard the words, deployment, liability, IP, but he had no context for the sheer scale of it. In his mind, she was still just the girl who paid the bills on time. His ego had a built-in filter for any information that threatened his spot at the top of their little food chain. Admitting her success meant admitting his own failure. "Wow," was all he could manage, blinking like an idiot. Then that condescending smirk came back, his last flimsy defense. "Sounds like a lot of paperwork. Don't get too burned out reading all that fine print, okay?" He heard the noise she made, but not a single word. He took another bite of his food, smug that he'd done his husbandly duty. He was completely, tragically clueless that the woman at his table was no longer a side character in his story. She was the architect of an empire he couldn't even comprehend, and she had already left him behind in the dust. For those final 3 weeks, Riley and I were ghosts haunting the glass towers of Peregrine North. We survived on lukewarm coffee and the adrenaline of the final push. We weren't there to sell our baby, Hawthorne Grid. This was never about cashing out. We were locking down a $34 million investment with a contract so tight it squeaked. The Peregrine suits didn't give a damn about the buzzwords Gavin loved to throw around. These guys built cities. They worried about things that could actually go wrong. They cared that Hawthorne could stop a burst pipe from flooding a penthouse or keep a hospital's lights on during a blackout. That was our magic. We landed that deal because we were everything Gavin's world found dull. We sold reliability, pure and simple. We were the silent, invisible force that saved their clients from financial ruin and PR disasters. My life was split in two. By day, I helped my best friend secure our $34 million future. At night, I watched her husband, Gavin, chase the ghost of importance in bars with men who thought money made them good. His new best friend was Bryce Danner, the king of his little delusion. Bryce was a real estate heir who thought being born on third base meant he'd hit a triple. He was whispering poison in Gavin's ear about cutting ties. Bryce convinced Gavin that an ordinary life, that Riley, was an anchor. He sold Gavin on this grand destiny, a fantasy my best friend's husband bought into while his own business was sinking in debt. It all came crashing together one muggy Tuesday. I was home, buzzing from a 14-hour legal review marathon. We were days away from signing. The win was so close I could taste it on the stale air of my apartment. That's when Riley called me, her voice hollow. She'd gotten home to find Gavin on their balcony, talking on the phone. She told me she stood in the shadows of her own living room, listening to him sell her out. "I married the wrong kind of woman," she heard him tell Bryce, his voice dripping with fake drama. "She just doesn't operate on the level I'm on now." That was the moment, the exact second the lock on my patience broke. "It's like trying to win a race dragging a safe, comfortable anchor," he'd said. Riley told me she felt nothing but cold finality. For me, it was pure rage. The man was a joke, and his punchline was my best friend. The irony was just staggering. Bryce Danner's empire was a dumpster fire, and Riley was holding the only fire hose in town. A few days later, our partner Noel breezed into my office, grinning like a shark. She shut the door and dropped a confidential report on my desk. "Read the section on Danner equity," she said, practically vibrating with the news. I scanned the page, and the whole pathetic story clicked into place. Bryce's real estate kingdom was crumbling under millions in city fines for failed systems and code violations. His investors were in a full-blown panic. The guy was completely cooked, and his company was bleeding cash. And the report specifically noted Danner Equity was scrambling to find the exact kind of predictive tech we built at Hawthorne Grid. We were the life raft being whispered about in the very rooms where Bryce held court. My best friend's company was the miracle they were all praying for. And the kicker, Gavin had no clue. He was too busy drinking Bryce's expensive whiskey and listening to him complain, never connecting a single dot. He'd come home from those nights with his useless guru and ask Riley if she was finished playing with her little spreadsheets. He was sleeping next to the one person who could save his hero, but his ego was a brick wall. It hit me then. It wasn't that Gavin didn't know about Hawthorne Grid's success. It was public. He just didn't care. He was fundamentally incapable of seeing value in anything that didn't reflect his own image back at him. His focus was reserved for things he thought made him look good. Since he'd already decided Riley was ordinary, he never bothered to look at the titan she'd become. The whole thing imploded that Sunday, 2 days before we flew to Atlanta. Riley told me he stood in their living room dressed in a cashmere sweater like he was filming a serious drama. He had the air of a man about to deliver a rehearsed, benevolent breakup speech. It was pathetic. "Riley," he began, oozing phony sincerity, "I've been thinking about my path." He paused, waiting for her to crumble. "I just need some space to think about what's next for me." I could just picture the scene. "I can't compromise my own potential," he finished, waiting for the tears. He needed her to beg, to promise she'd try to be shinier for him, to fit into the little box he'd built. He needed to be the one leaving. But she just sat there, looking at this man who'd made her feel small for years. This man who traded her for a thumbs up from a failing trust fund baby. I've never been more proud of her in my life." She said nothing. Between them, there was just a cold void where love used to be. Her mind was made. The Atlanta conference room felt like a freezer, the air humming with the sound of the AC and quiet money. 6 hours we sat at that enormous table. Peregrine's top lawyer was across from Riley, his pen floating over a screen as he did the final review. We were there. We had made it to the 1-yard line. Every single clause had been fought over, every security protocol locked down. Finally, the Peregrine exec gave a short, decisive nod. He slid the encrypted tablet to Riley. She didn't hesitate for a second. She took the stylus and signed her name, clear and firm. A $34 million signature. A green seal flashed on the screen, and I swear you could hear the entire room exhale, a collective sigh of relief. Handshakes were exchanged, briefcases snapped shut. The Peregrine team gave us tight, professional smiles. But Riley wasn't crying. She wasn't celebrating. I watched her closely, knowing this was more than a business deal. As the room emptied, I saw it happen. I watched my best friend sit up straighter than I'd seen her in 5 years. The weight of making herself small for a man with a fragile ego just lifted off her shoulders. She took a deep, steady breath, and it was like she was reclaiming her own space in the world. Down in the lobby, Noel was already planning the celebration, talking about champagne and rooftop bars. It was a huge win. But Riley just shook her head. That kind of loud victory lap felt all wrong. She led me away from the opulent hotel to a quiet little coffee shop a few blocks away. I knew this wasn't about champagne. As she ordered a simple tea, I understood. This win wasn't joy. It was clarity. Building her empire had just burned the last remaining bridge to the fantasy of her marriage. There was no going back. She had just built a legacy, and she was married to a man who saw her as his assistant. As she traced the rim of her cup, her phone buzzed on the table. It was him. It was Gavin. A text message. At 2 p.m. on the single biggest day of her professional life. She opened it, and I watched the last bit of warmth drain from her face. It read, "Hey, did you pick up my suit from the cleaners?" I stared at her, and she just looked at the screen. No rage, no snarky reply. Just the brutal irony of it all. $34 million on the table, and her husband was asking about his dry cleaning. He was cosplaying as a business titan, and I was sitting across from the real thing in a quiet coffee shop in Atlanta. A few nights later, when we were back in Charlotte, she finally filed for divorce. Riley told me Gavin came home reeking of expensive gin and Bryce Danner's particular brand of entitlement. He'd stood in their living room, all faux anguish, looking like he'd just walked off a stage. I could picture it perfectly. Then he launched into the speech she said he'd obviously practiced. It was 5 minutes of corporate buzzwords, synergy, growth curves, some garbage about a paradigm shift. It all circled the drain before he finally said he wanted a trial separation. He claimed he needed to find himself, that their comfortable life was a cage. I almost choked on my coffee when she told me that part. He actually paused for dramatic effect, waiting for the tears he was so sure were coming. The arrogance is just breathtaking. He expected a full-on meltdown. He wanted her to drop her work, to see her hands tremble. He was banking on the begging, the pleading, the whole desperate, we can fix this routine. He needed to see her break just to feel powerful. But she just looked him dead in the eye, her pulse never even jumping. She told me she just gave him this one. Single nod. "Okay," she said, her voice totally flat. "I'll have my lawyer draw up the separation agreement." His whole script just went up in flames. She said for a second, he looked completely stunned, like he'd prepared for a tidal wave and got total silence instead. He tried to cover with this smug, pitying smile before he stomped off to the bedroom to pack his little bag. He made a big show of it, throwing his fancy shirts and overpriced face creams into a weekend bag. Every sound was exaggerated, like a toddler having a tantrum, trying to make sure she knew how serious he was. He announced he was staying at Bryce's loft. At the door, he paused, his hand on the knob, giving her one last chance to fall apart and beg him to stay. I swear, the man lives for the drama. She just went back to reading her reports, didn't even look up. I've never been prouder. The second the lock clicked, a different kind of quiet settled in. She told me she walked into their bedroom and just looked at the closet. All his stuff was gone, leaving this clean, open space next to her clothes. It was a physical symbol of the dead weight she'd dropped. A single hanger was left, swaying a little. And standing there looking at that empty space, she said it finally hit her. She wasn't sad. She wasn't heartbroken. She knew, with this crazy clarity, that Gavin wasn't the one who was really gone. The person who'd vanished was the woman she used to be. The Riley who always made herself smaller, who sanded down her own edges so she wouldn't scuff his fragile ego. The one who thought she had to shrink to fit into his world. That woman was history. She'd been fading for years, and that night, Riley finally let her go. Monday morning hit, and at 8 a.m. sharp, the press release from Paragon North Holdings went live. We were officially in business. By 9, every major tech journal had the story. We were the headline. There was this amazing photo of Riley with the Peregrine execs, and right under her name, it said it all: co-founder and chief executive officer. I framed a copy for our office, and there it was, in the very first paragraph, the number that would change everything: $34 million. For us inside Hawthorne Grid, it was just the beginning of the real work. The news was already old news. We were deep in deployment logistics. But in Gavin's world, that carefully curated bubble of status and money he'd tried so hard to get into, that's where the bomb went off. The news broke in the exact rooms he told Riley she was too plain to enter. I can just see Bryce Danner, hung over in that stupid loft scrolling the market briefs. His whole fund was hemorrhaging cash because of the exact problems our software was built to solve. The irony was almost too much. Imagine the color draining from his face when he sees the picture of the woman he told Gavin to dump. The supposed dead weight had just locked down an exclusive deal with the biggest name in their entire industry. Chef's kiss. The group chats must have absolutely exploded. The news bouncing between all those guys who sat at Riley's table, drinking her wine, while Gavin called her his boring, safe bet. All those venture capital bros who smiled at her like she was the catering staff. The funniest part is that their entire careers are built on getting access to people like Riley. They were literally sitting in the same room as the future of their industry, and their own pathetic sexism made them completely blind to it. The desperate calls started coming to her cell around 2 p.m. We watched the unknown numbers pop up on her screen. We knew it was his friends, suddenly desperate for an inside track to Paragon. She let every single one go to voicemail. Then Gavin started. It was a full-on assault. She put her phone on her desk, and we just watched his name flash again and again. He called 4 times in an hour, then 5 more as the sun went down. The desperation was rolling off the screen. When she wouldn't answer, the voicemails began. We sat there in her office long after everyone else had gone home and listened to them. It was a master class in panic. The first one was just him, breathless, asking if the $34 million figure was a typo. By the third message, he was a completely different person. The condescending artist act was gone. He was frantic, trying to rewrite their entire history on the fly. "You need to call me," he pleaded, his voice echoing like he was hiding in a stairwell. "I'm only just seeing this. I don't get why you hid the scale of this from me. I didn't have the whole picture. If I'd known what you were doing, things would have been different. We need to figure out our messaging on this." Our messaging. Unbelievable. I just didn't have the full picture. He actually said it twice. He was framing years of dismissiveness as a simple clerical error. He honestly wanted her to believe he only disrespected her because he hadn't seen her balance sheet. He was too stupid to even realize his excuse was a confession. He was flat out admitting that his wife's value was directly tied to her company's valuation. But the voicemails weren't even the worst part. Noel, our head of ops, brought us that little gift just before 6. She walked into Riley's office, her face like stone, and dropped a printed call log on the desk. Our receptionist had fielded a bizarre call. Some guy, using this ridiculously fake deep voice, had called the main line. He was aggressively demanding to speak to our integration manager about the Peregrine deployment timeline. When our receptionist asked for his clearance, the guy actually identified himself as the co-founder's spousal strategic advisor. He demanded access. Riley just pointed at the highlighted phone number. It was Gavin's cell. She and I just looked at each other, and we both knew. He wasn't calling to save his marriage. Those pathetic voicemails weren't about love. It was a hostile corporate action. He was trying to steal confidential information to make himself look good to Bryce and claw his way back into a success story he had no part in. He was trying to attach his name to her victory. I watched her calmly pick up her phone and play his messages again. She listened to the fake sighs, the manufactured concern, this whole pathetic performance of a husband who was just tragically out of the loop. It was sickening. When the last message ended, the office was dead silent. There was no victory dance, no fist pump, just this cold, quiet finality. He could finally see her, but only after years of her making herself small enough for him to ignore. He wasn't seeing his wife. He was seeing $34 million walking out the door, and the sheer panic of losing access to it was all he could feel. That thought was cut short by the sound of a key in her apartment lock later that night. She was on the phone with me when it happened. He just walked in, like he'd been invited. No call, no text. He used the key he was supposed to have returned. He threw his jacket on a chair and walked right up to the kitchen island where she was working, acting like he owned the place. He sat across from her, arranging his face into this look of deep, personal injury, as if he was the victim here. And his first words to her, she told me, were, "How could you hide all of this from me?" The absolute mind-blowing audacity of that man. She told me he actually looked her in the eye and asked if she was hiding things from him, and the sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. He had this whole wounded act down, trying to flip the script so he wouldn't have to face his own pathetic ego. Riley said she just calmly shut her laptop, giving him her full, unnerving focus. "I never hid a thing," she told him, her voice perfectly steady. "I've been right here, with you, building this company from this exact spot every night." She reminded him her office door was always open, that he always knew where she was going on business trips. He just shook his head, like he was the one being betrayed. "You never told me about Peregrine," he whined. "You built this huge thing in secret and made me look like a fool." I love this part. She told me she looked right at him and said, "You don't need my help to look foolish." She laid it out plain. "I wasn't hiding it. You just weren't interested enough to ever ask a real question. And when I tried to tell you, you'd just call it my little compliance project." She threw his own words back at him, how he'd called it admin work or back-end paperwork, how he'd shrunk her entire career into a neat little box so it would never threaten his. That's when she saw his whole self-righteous posture just deflate a little. So of course he switched tactics. He tried to rewrite history, painting himself as her #1 fan. "That's not fair," he'd complained, his voice turning petulant. "I always told everyone you were the smartest person I knew. I was always your biggest champion. I just didn't know it would get to this level," he said. "Who could have predicted this kind of money?" Riley told me she just let that hang in the air for a second. "This level," she repeated back to him, making the words sound as hollow as they were. That was the core of it, she explained. Her work was fine when it was a cute little hobby. The insane hours and the actual genius of what she was creating meant nothing to him. But now there was a big, shiny number attached, one he could use to impress his friends, and suddenly he was all in. When he started to argue, she just cut him off, leaning over the counter with her hands flat on the stone, ice cold. She asked him if he remembered a specific dinner from about 2 years back. His eyes darted away. He remembered. She'd just landed their first major city contract after 4 weeks of grinding on a new predictive model. She tried to explain it to him, and he cut her off to complain about some graphic designer. She reminded him about the time he literally laughed at her for suggesting she demo her framework for a venture capitalist. He was trying to impress. Enterprise safety systems aren't sexy, he'd told her. And then she brought up the night just a few weeks ago in that same kitchen when he told her his friends thought she was too ordinary for his world. The final nail. I wish I could have seen his face. She said it just went white. All that fake wounded pride evaporated, replaced by the slow dawning horror that he was completely, utterly screwed. He couldn't argue with a detailed list of his own failures. With nowhere left to run, Gavin's whole vibe shifted. His shoulders slumped, he took this shaky breath and tried to put on his best, vulnerable face. He even tried to reach for her hand, but she pulled it back before he could make contact. "Just listen," he pleaded like they were co-conspirators. He tried to sell her on a do-over, blamed it all on stress, on them being in different worlds. He actually suggested that this was a good thing, a wake-up call for them to finally see each other. The nerve. He was offering to forgive her for her success, as long as he got a front-row seat to the new, wealthy version of her life. He genuinely believed that their history gave him some kind of claim. Riley said she just looked at him. Really looked at him. The designer shirt, the perfect hair, and the desperate, greedy look in his eyes. She told me she felt this wave of exhaustion, but it was clean, like the feeling after a fever finally breaks. "You are still missing the entire point," she told him, her voice quiet but heavy. "This was never about the $34 million, she said. It's not about the company, the articles, or the deals. Those are just symptoms." He just stared at her, completely lost. A world where $34 million wasn't the main character was just beyond his comprehension. "The point," she continued, holding his gaze, "is that you couldn't see any value in me on your own. You lived with me. You watched me bleed for this company every single day, and you saw nothing worthwhile until other men told you it was. The only reason you respect me now is because Bryce Danner does." Then she stood up and closed her laptop for good. "There's no fresh start, Gavin," she said flatly. "There's only you in my house, trying to figure out how to profit from the woman you already threw away." She never raised her voice, never cried. She just delivered the truth. "You didn't miss the number," she told his pale, shocked face. "You missed the person who created it." For the first time ever, he had absolutely nothing to say. The kitchen was dead silent. He was speechless. No excuses, no deflections, nothing. He just looked around the room like a man who'd lost a winning lottery ticket and was just now realizing it. He looked completely and utterly blank. He got up without another word and walked out. The click of the door was the end of it, or so we thought. Riley really believed it would be a clean break, a simple divorce, a quiet end to a quiet misery. But we both underestimated how ugly a mediocre man gets when his ego is shattered. The first call came from her lawyer, Vera Sloan, on a Tuesday morning. Vera sounded like a field general, all business. "He's lawyering up," Vera said, no preamble. "My people say he's meeting with the biggest sharks in the city, the kind of lawyers you hire for a scorched earth fight. He's going to claim the $34 million deal is marital property," Vera explained, "and that he deserves half." I was with Riley when she took the call, watching the rain on her office window. It wasn't sadness on her face. It was pure, unadulterated disgust. For years, her work was a joke to him. Now that it had a valuation, he was claiming to be a founding partner. Before we could even process that, her console lit up. It was our head of cybersecurity. His voice was grim. "Server room, now." Our CISO, Noel, was already there, looking absolutely murderous. An engineer was pointing at a screen showing a network map. "We caught a massive data exfiltration 3 hours ago," the engineer said, his voice tight. "A draft of the Peregrine deployment strategy, sent to a junior analyst at an investment firm." He highlighted the recipient's email address. The firm was a subsidiary of Danner Equity Partners. Bryce Danner's company. The air in the room went from cold to Arctic. This wasn't a divorce tactic. This was corporate espionage. "How?" was all Riley said. "I locked down all executive accounts last week," she stated, her voice like ice. The engineer pulled up the access logs. "It wasn't your work computer. The file was accessed from a retired tablet." "An old tablet of Gavin's," he specified, "left in a drawer at your house. It was still synced to the home network. Someone used his old cloud login to wake it up, found the file in a backup, and sent it out." The ultimate betrayal. He didn't just want her money, he wanted to burn her kingdom down. When Riley told me, I wasn't surprised Gavin was capable of something so shady. The man could barely work his email. I was floored that he was so weak, so desperate to feel important. He'd let someone gut the very thing he always pretended was beneath him. It all fell into place that afternoon, and honestly, it made my stomach turn. Noel started digging into Danner equity. Turns out Bryce Danner's firm was hemorrhaging money from bad real estate bets. He desperately needed to know our launch strategy to try and save his own skin. Bryce probably offered Gavin some joke of a consulting role, a chance to finally feel like a player by selling out the real one in his life. Gavin literally sold his wife down the river for an approving nod from a guy who was just using him. By that night, our internal mess had exploded into a full-on crisis. Peregrine North's board was on the line. Their own security caught the data transfer tied to their contract. Livid doesn't even begin to cover it. A breach like that was a cardinal sin. Their head lawyer gave it to us straight. We had 48 hours to deliver ironclad legal proof the breach wasn't due to negligence from our leadership. If we couldn't, the 1,000-property deal was dead. The game had completely changed. This wasn't about a messy divorce anymore. This was about survival. Riley had to protect the company, the 30 people who trusted her with their careers, and the deal that was our entire future. Gavin wanted to burn it all down. He'd forgotten she owned the damn ground it was built on. The idea of paying him off to make it disappear never even came up. Riley didn't back down. She went on the offensive. She approved a top-tier forensics team to trace every single bite. She wanted undeniable third-party proof of where that leak started, down to Gavin's own tablet. At the same time, we turned Vera Sloane's office into a war room. Vera began building a legal fortress, pulling every document we had, incorporation papers, IP filings from years before Riley even met him, and financials that proved our growth had nothing to do with his money. Noel got the best assignment. She spent 12 hours pulling 7 years of company emails and records. She built a massive file that proved Gavin had never contributed a single idea, logged a minute of work, or invested 1 cent into Hawthorne Grid. The evidence showed he wasn't a silent partner. He was dead weight. We powered through the night on coffee and the kind of laser focus you only get from pure, righteous anger. As the sun came up, we knew we had him cornered. An emergency summit was set for 10 a.m. the next day at Peregrine North's headquarters. Everyone had to be there. Their legal team, our team, the auditors, and, at our specific request, Riley's soon-to-be ex-husband. I just watched the city wake up, feeling the weight of the files on her desk. Gavin was about to walk into that room thinking he'd laid the perfect ambush. He expected Riley to be backed into a corner, ready to write a check to hide his mess. He had no idea he wasn't showing up for a negotiation. He was showing up to be publicly dismantled. For years, he'd coasted on this illusion of being smarter than everyone else. We were about to rip that mask off in front of the only people who mattered. The doors to the boardroom shut with a heavy thud. It was 10 in the morning, and you could barely breathe. It was Vera, Noel, me, and our lead forensics guy with Riley on one side. Gavin sat directly across from us, next to some shark of a lawyer who was obviously working for a cut. The top brass from Peregrine North sat at the head of the table, looking grim. Gavin looked so relaxed in his stupidly expensive suit, leaning back like he owned the place. He was giving Riley this look of fake sympathy, like a gracious king waiting for her to bend the knee. I wanted to throw something at him. His lawyer launched into this slick, rehearsed speech. The core of it was that since the company blew up during their 4-year marriage, the $34 million deal was marital property. He went on and on about fairness and partnership. Then he made his play, wrapping a threat in a smooth voice. He glanced at the Peregrine execs, talking about how stressful this data leak must be. He offered a simple fix, a huge settlement for Gavin to handle their private issues so the launch could go on without any more drama. He was trying to blackmail her with a crisis he manufactured, right there in front of everyone. Our lawyer, Vera Sloan, just let him talk. She let the silence after he finished hang in the air for a beat too long. Then she opened her briefcase. "Counselor," she said, her voice arctic, "your entire case is a work of fiction." Vera started placing thick, tabbed binders on the table, each one landing with a solid, definitive smack. She never raised her voice. She let the evidence speak for itself. First up were the original incorporation docs and our IP patents. Every single one was dated and filed 3 years before Gavin and Riley had even met. Then came the financial ledgers, backed by bank affidavits showing every cent of investment was from company revenue. Finally, Vera slid a massive report across the polished table. This is a full audit of Mr. Wexler's life for the last 7 years. It has his bank statements, tax returns, and thousands of his own company's emails. It proves he never contributed a single dollar, a single hour of work, or a single decent idea to Hawthorne Grid. He wasn't a partner. He has zero financial stake in this company. Gavin's smug little smile finally started to twitch. His lawyer was squinting at the documents, but Vera was just warming up. She motioned to our head of cyber forensics to take over. Our guy hooked his laptop up, and a huge data map filled the wall screen. He looked straight at the Peregrine team. "We did a 48-hour deep dive on your breach," he said. "The schedule wasn't stolen by hackers, and it wasn't leaked by Hawthorne's executive team. The file was copied from a synced tablet inside Miss Adams's house." The engineer clicked a button, and a red line of data lit up the map. The tablet belonged to Gavin Wexler. It was activated remotely using his old personal password. Access logs show the file was opened, a screenshot was taken, and then sent to a server owned by an analyst at Danner Equity Partners. This all happened just 4 hours after the deal was announced. All the color just vanished from Gavin's face. He physically slumped in his chair. He threw this panicked look at his lawyer, who was just staring at the screen in total horror. But the final blow didn't even come from our side. It came from Peregrine North's chairman. The old guy leaned forward. "We've been watching Bryce Danner's funds for months," he boomed into the microphone. "We were already pretty certain he was trying to steal our rollout data to save his own failing investments. We just needed the digital evidence to prove it." He paused, then looked Gavin dead in the eye. "You just handed it to us. Let me make this crystal clear. As of this moment, Bryce Danner, his companies, and anyone tied to him is blacklisted from doing any business with Peregrine North, permanently. If he promised you a big consulting payday for this, Mr. Wexler, that promise is now worthless." The trap snapped shut so hard you could almost hear it. Gavin committed a felony to get a golden ticket, only to find out he'd given it to a guy who was now banned from the casino. His lawyer moved like he was escaping a fire, snapping his laptop shut and hissing at Gavin. Suddenly, the math was very, very simple. If Gavin continued his claim, our companies would press federal charges for corporate espionage. He wouldn't just leave with nothing, he'd leave in handcuffs, his reputation totally torched. On the record, his lawyer immediately withdrew the petition. The meeting was over. While everyone else packed up, Gavin just sat there, catatonic, staring at nothing. His entire world had been publicly incinerated in less than an hour. Riley stood up, smoothed her blazer, and walked over to him. She wasn't cruel or smug. "There was no need. This is the last time you will ever try to use my work as a weapon against me." She said it so calmly, without a single shred of anger. "It's not happening again." The divorce was almost laughably quick after that. With zero leverage and a felony charge hanging over his head, Gavin signed every paper Vera gave him. And Riley kept the house, of course. And just like that, Gavin was gone. He didn't leave like some heartbroken husband. He slunk away like the architect of his own spectacular failure. 3 months on, Hawthorne Grid launched the first phase of the Peregrine deal. We didn't miss a beat. We were standing in the new HQ, our new HQ, baptized in the glow of 100 data streams on the big board. 10,000 properties connecting, smooth as glass. I slid a coffee into her hand, grinning like an idiot. "Some boring little compliance firm we built, huh?" I said. She just smiled, that quiet, powerful smile, and we watched our empire grow. But the real victory wasn't under the fluorescent lights of a boardroom. It was her telling me about a Tuesday night, sun spilling into her kitchen. Just her, chopping vegetables for one. The condo was finally quiet, she said, no longer suffocated by the need to manage his paper-thin ego. That's when it hit me, the part I'd known all along. The $34 million blunder wasn't his real failure. His real failure was looking at the woman building a kingdom in his own house and, with all the clueless arrogance in the world, calling her ordinary. Thanks for sticking with me through this. I'm dying to know where you're all listening from, so drop it in the comments. Make sure you subscribe to Violet Revenge Stories, smash that like button, and hit the hype button to send this story out to more people.